one thing I would say as we kind of wait for folks to add in some questions is that there are so many resources for folks when it comes to climate and bringing that into the classroom. And something that I found in connecting with a lot of educators and communities is that they just don't know what resources that are out there. I was giving a talk just the other day where someone said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that Project Drawdown existed," which normally we don't get that. But what we do here is, I didn't realize that Climate Solutions 101 was a resource. I didn't know about Drawdown's Neighborhood, of course, because it's newer. I didn't know about some of the other things that I've linked there, and so I would really invite you all, especially as community members, as educators, and others who care about climate, to explore and figure out what tools and resources from the lists there work for you, and also realize there are so many more resources that are not included in that link from many, many other organizations. And so other educators, especially environmental educators or others who are working on climate, are a great resource.
So my question to you,
Yeah.
are these questions organized by the subject matter and by grade? How the educators who use those lesson plans could start navigating those lesson plans to even to figure out what they need and what is appropriate for the grade that they teach in school.
Yeah, so one thing I will do again is to just share my screen and show one of the resources that I mentioned. So to go back to this link, the one that I have at the bottom here, subject to climate, and actually about half of these resources are not Project Drawdown generated resources, but subject to climate is generated based on Project Drawdown. So we don't have for what we do have around Drawdown's Neighborhood, for instance, are discussion questions and resources to learn more, and we link out to different resources to take action. With Subject to Climate, which actually has lesson plans and some other resources, these were all actually developed by educators. Subject to Climate is a great resource because they have a team of educators that actually volunteers to take different resources and then wrap them around different lesson plans. And you could even see here, if you visit this page, it shows the subjects that it's relevant to. It shows grade levels that it's suggested for. It talks about if the resource or the lesson plan is global, and also the different formats. So you'll see Climate Solutions 101 listed here, and it is a video format. And I will click into the table of solutions because that is one of the more popular ones. So you'll see it with these subject to climate lesson plans that they have like different synopses of the actual resource. They include teaching tips, so like positives, additional prerequisites, like differentiation is noted here, and then some other things that are really helpful for educators as they use these resources. One thing I would say, though, again, is like while Subject to Climate is a great resource and includes a lot, I also recognize that educators are so good at just taking anything and making something useful for students out of it. So my goal is to share all of the really strong resources that we know about to really get people to engage that way. So I'll stop sharing for now. And I do see a question here in the chat, or a note in the chat. Is there a resource on how to capture stories or support people to craft their climate stories? Yeah, so actually there are many resources that I could think of that we don't really focus on when it comes to capturing stories or supporting people to craft their stories. That's actually something that I would want to develop over time, like some kind of resource from Project Drawdown and from me that's helping people tell their stories. But I would actually just share a resource or an organization that I admire as a resource. So there's an organization called Planet Forward, planetforward.org. And Planet Forward actually has a storytelling toolkit. So it is just one phenomenal resource for helping people craft their own stories. But the thing I would say about storytelling overall is that that is like almost an entirely other topic where there are a lot of great resources. I think there's a lot of great storytelling that's being done around climate. I'm seeing a couple more questions coming in, which is great. So one question is, any suggested path on how to get this out to teachers? We have relationships with a few teachers, but this needs to get out across to all teachers. Yes, yes. So this is exactly something that I think about a lot. One thing that that's so powerful, and you mentioned the relationships you have with other teachers, is literally you just sharing, you just telling others about this presentation. Like in the follow-up, forwarding this recording, forwarding the link tree along to people, telling people, hey, you should check out Drawdown's Neighborhood and Project Drawdown and Drawdown Solutions. These things are all incredibly helpful. So I don't actually have the best ideas for how you could share. I think it depends on each person, but think about all of the networks you're a part of. Think of the different Slack channels or forums that you might be on. Like any opportunity that you have to connect with others is a great opportunity to point people to some of these resources. And so, we really, in other than the work that we do to spread the word, I would say that we really find educators and other community members to be the best way to reach others. It actually kind of goes back to something I mentioned with Per-Espen Stoknes and the 5 Ds of the 5 inner defenses, in other words, of climate communication, and then the 5 brain-friendly S's. One of them is social networks. So people respond and listen when they hear from people they trust and they know. And that's one reason why it's so critical that you spread the word and that you share the resources that you have. And then there's one more question I haven't answered that's listed out for now. And the question is, as a student, what do you suggest we can do on an individual level to best help combat climate change? That's a great question. And I think that the best thing that you could do to on an individual level, well, I think it actually depends on each person. But one thing I would say is that one of my teammates, Jamie Alexander, who works with our corporate partners on in a program called Drawdown Labs, which is part of Project Drawdown, actually has this great TED Talk, which I just dropped into the chat also, and maybe that I'll add to the link tree at some point. But one thing she says is that no matter where you work, every job is a climate job, or every job could be a climate job, and she really stresses the fact that there is no one size fits all approach to making a difference when it comes to climate, when it comes to combating climate. So like Kaylee, in your example, what you could do at an individual level, I would say that that really depends on, what superpowers you might bring to the table. What relationships do you have? Who can you influence other than, well, I mean, while influencing policymakers and is so critical, who else can you influence? Like, could you go to your workplace and use the Climate Solutions at Work guide to say, hey, how could we be a more green and sustainable workplace? But yeah, every person's individual contributions, I think, depend on again, I like to think of them as superpowers, the superpowers that they bring to the table. So as educators, because I know many of you are educators, one of those powers is just recognizing that, I'm one person and I'm sharing these resources with you, but you reach so many students, you reach other teachers, other educators, you have other sessions like this where you're able to connect with people who are looking for resources. And so one thing I would say is like, use your power to spread the word, but also think about ways that you could green or make your world a more sustainable world. Even if it might feel small or like a drop in the bucket, as is referenced in the Drawdown's Neighborhood video with Clara, it does add up and it does make a difference. And I'm just so thankful that you all have taken out the time to consider how you could make a difference and combat climate change. And I did see one question that popped up that I just want to address because it's relevant to all of us. This question from someone about just the fact that so many people, professional students, for instance, medical in the medical fields, lawyers are so busy with their curriculums. How do we suggest we engage them? And something I would say to consider is that climate change overlaps with all of these things. Climate change overlaps with law, climate change overlaps with medicine and health, especially. And so, there's always an opportunity to connect climate solutions and climate change to those conversations that are happening through with medical students, with lawyers, with professional students. And something I would also say is that if they're not talking about climate change and climate solutions, they're missing something huge because climate change is only becoming more urgent across all fields. And if we're not teaching students across a wide range of disciplines about climate change and climate justice and climate solutions, we're not giving them the full story and the information they need to succeed in a world where climate change is increasingly urgent and increasingly relevant. And again, one thing I would just encourage you all to do is remember your power, and that you even sending an email to someone to use a resource or spread the word or offer a resource that I shared, whether it's a Project Drawdown one or not, to someone else could really go a long way. There's always the ripple effect there. So thank you again for having me.